Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at EBS volumes as well as snapshots. So this is a lab and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. I'm in the Northern Virginia region. I'm going to go over to ec2. Hopefully you remember where it is right by now, but it is under compute. And we've got this ec2 instance that's running in here. This is our little web server. If we actually go down to volumes, we'll be able to see the volume that it's running on. And you can see that this volume is in US East 1D. If we go over to our ec2 instance by going to the dashboard and clicking on running instances, you'll see that the actual virtual machine is in US East 1D. And this is a really important topic to remember for your exam. Wherever your ec2 instance is, the volume is going to be in the same availability zone. And that makes sense if you think about it. If you think about a physical computer, you always want the hard disk drive to be as close to the motherboard as possible. So when you've got a virtual machine and then a virtual hard disk drive, you want them to be in the same availability zone. You don't want them to be in different availability zones because you're going to have a huge amount of lag. So just really important to remember going into your exam that your EBS volumes will always be in the same availability zones as your ec2 instance. So another common scenario in your exams will be where you want to move your ec2 instance or your EBS volume from one availability zone to another. And we'll look at how we can do that in a little bit in this lab. But the first thing I want to show you is what happens if we terminate this instance. What is going to happen to this volume? So let's go ahead and kill off our little web server. He's served us well. So I'm going to go over here and go to instance state and click on terminate, and I'm going to go ahead and terminate that. So that is now shutting down my ec2 instance. If I go over to my volumes as well, right now it says it's in use, but I'm just going to pause the video for a couple of minutes and see what happens. Okay, so it's been a couple of minutes. I'm just going to hit the refresh button, and now you can see that it removed that EBS volume automatically from my volumes console. So if we go back over to ec2, let's go ahead and launch a new instance. We're going to use the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to use a T2 micro. I'm going to leave everything else as default. I'm going to go ahead and add my storage. So in here I can add additional volumes. And this volume type here is a root. So it's the root device volume. This is where the operating system is going to be installed. I can add a new volume in here. Note the volume type here is just EBS. It is restricted, and we'll look at why in a few lectures from now. But there's the volume type over here as well. And this is where we can change to the different volume standards. So we can use GP2, which is general purpose. We can use provisioned IOPS. We can use cold hard disk drive. We can use throughput optimize, and we can use magnetic. So why don't we go and choose two of them? So I'm going to choose cold hard disk drive. And I'm going to also choose throughput optimize. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and choose magnetic as well. So I'm going to use three of them. Now, I'm not using provisioned IOPS. And the reason for that is we want to promote one of these to provisioned IOPS. So let's go ahead. In here, we can actually go in and encrypt it because it's not a root device volume. So we can encrypt it by default. I'm not going to encrypt it. We'll look at that a little bit later. Let's go in and add our tags. I'm not going to add any tags. I'm going to use an existing security group. I'm going to use my web DMZ, which has HTTP and SSH open to the world. I'm going to go ahead and hit review and launch, and I'm going to go ahead and launch that ec2 instance. So that will take a couple of minutes to come up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause the video while I wait for this ec2 instance to come live. Okay, so that ec2 instance is now live, and I've actually got a pretty cool IP address. I've never seen a 3 IP address before. So I'm going to go down and going to have a look at my volumes. So it's under Elastic Block Store in here. I'm going to go ahead and click on volumes, and you'll be able to see our different volumes in here. So we've got GP2. This is our root device volume. So this is where our operating system is installed. We've got ST1. This is our throughput optimized one. We've got SC1. This is our cold hard disk drive. And then we've got standard, and this is our standard magnetic volume. And remember, this is previous generation. So let's go ahead and have a look at what we can do with these volumes. So if we go to ST1, we can go to our actions and we can go and modify our volumes. We can actually just go in and change the size. So we could increase this from 500 gigs to 1,000 gigs. and go ahead and hit modify. And that will go ahead and modify the volume. Now it says here that it may take some time for performance changes to take effect. So it will, it will impact on your performance, and it may take some time for it to take effect because it is increasing the hard disk drive of it. And you also may need to extend the operating system file system on the volume to use it. So your operating system will only see the 500 initially. What you might have to go in and do is you'll have to go in and run a command and basically repartition the drive so you'll be able to see the full 1000. And you can actually learn about how to do that by clicking on the Linux or Windows one. Again, it's beyond the scope of the Certified Solutions Architect course as to how to do this. We do cover it off in the Certified SysOps Administrator Associate course, however. So let's go ahead and modify this volume, and that is now increasing this volume from 500 gigs to 1000. Another one we'll have a look at, let's go over to GP2. So this is our root device volume. And the reason you can find that it's the root device volume is it's come from that AMI. It's come from that Amazon machine image, the Linux, Amazon Linux 2 AMI. And this is the snapshot. So we're basically using Amazon's snapshot of that AMI. And we can go over here and modify this volume. And we can change the volume type. We can actually go up to provisioned IOPS. So instead of staying at GP2, we could modify it to provisioned IOPS. And again, this will affect the performance of the EC2 instance, but notice that you don't have to go and shut it down or stop the instance or anything like that. You can do it on the fly. So it is really, really clever technology. So I'm just going to pause the video. I'm going to wait for this to upgrade to provisioned IOPS, and I'm going to wait for one of these to upgrade to 1000 gigs. So I'm just going to pause video now. Okay, so it's been a couple of minutes. I'm just going to go ahead and hit refresh. And we can see that this is now IO1, and we can see that this is now 1000 gigs. So it took a little bit of time. This is actually still just coming into use. But it only actually took a couple of minutes, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Not only are we changing the storage medium, but we're also increasing the amount of storage available. So it is pretty cool tech. So one of the things, a very popular exam question is, let's say that you've got your EC2 instance and your EBS volume in a particular availability zone. So in US East 1B, for example, and you want to move it to US East 1C. How do you go about doing that? Well, the easiest way to do that is to go into is to find your root device volume and all your volumes, depending on the scenario question. But let's just say it's the root device volume. So you want to move this root device volume to another availability zone. Let's go ahead and see how we do that. So we go to Actions, and we're going to go and create a snapshot. And a snapshot is exactly what you would think it is. It's basically a photograph of the disk. And I'm going to call this my EC2 Snap 2019, something like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Create Snapshot. And that is now creating a snapshot. And snapshots do take a little bit of time. You can find snapshots here under EBS. If you click on there, it sometimes won't even show up in here for a couple of minutes. You can see that is pending. So while that is, I'm just going to pause the video and wait for this to come back up online. Okay, so that snapshot has now been completed, and you can see it in here. Now with our snaps, what we can do is we can go ahead and create an image, or we could create another volume. If we create an image, we can then use that image to be deployed into other availability zones. So let's go ahead and create our image. We'll call it my EC2 image, something like that. And I'm going to give it the same description. So I'm just going to copy it over here. I'm going to leave everything else as default, and I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And that will now create an image from our snapshot. And we'll be able to use that image to go ahead and provision new EC2 instances. We can see our images over here under AMIs. So if I go in here, we can see that image is now available. And I can go ahead and click on that and go ahead and hit launch. And that can launch as a new EC2 instance. Now, because it is an image, it can only go to certain EC2 instance types. This one, T1 Micro, will work for us. So go ahead and hit next. And then what we can do is we can launch that into a completely different subnet. So I could go and launch it into US East 1A. So completely different availability zone. And sorry, sometimes I interchange subnet and availability zone. We will cover off what they are in the VPC section of the course. But for now, just note that we can launch this into US East 1A. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to add my storage. add my tags. I'm going to not do any tags. I'm going to use an existing security group. I'm going to use my web DMZ, review and launch, and I'm going to go ahead and launch that. Now, you don't have to go ahead and do this. I'm just showing you how we can migrate data from one EBS instance or one ec2 instance in one availability zone to another. So the first thing you do is you go ahead and you create a snapshot. You then turn that snapshot into an AMI, and then you use that AMI to launch into other availability zones. The other cool thing you can do is, of course, copy the AMI into different regions. So we could go in and go here to Actions, and we could go ahead and hit Copy AMI, and we can now move this Amazon machine image from our destination regions, from our existing region, so from Northern Virginia, and we can go ahead and move this over to London, for example. And then we can use this image to launch our EC2 instances into the London region. So this is a way of not only moving across availability zones, but also a way of moving across regions. And the only difference here is we're copying the AMI from one region to another. Once that AMI is in a new region, we can then launch it into that region and choose any availability zone that we want. So those are popular exam questions that will come up in your exam. So let's go back over to EC2, and I'm just going to go to my running instances. We can see that we've got our two running instances. This is the new one, the one that we just launched into US East 1A, and we've got one in US East 1B. We go over to our volumes, we should be able to see our new volume as well. So we've launched this one is just on GP2 standard. Here's our original one, which is on provisioned IOPS. So we learnt right at the start of this lecture, if I go ahead and delete the EC2 instance, that the root device volume is going to be deleted as well. But what about these additional volumes? What do you think will happen if I go in and terminate those two EC2 instances? Do you think these three volumes will be terminated along with this one? Or do you think that they will persist? And that, again, this can be a very popular exam topic. So let's go over to our EC2 instances and we can test this. So I'm going to go in and click in here, go to Actions, Instance State, Terminate. So we're terminating both of them. And that will go in and terminate them. So I'm just going to pause the video and wait for this instance state to change to terminated. So these have now changed to terminated. Let's go over and have a look at our EBS volumes. And you can see that these have persisted. Their state has changed. They're now available, but they have persisted on. So when you terminate an EC2 instance, by default, the root device volume will also be terminated. However, additional volumes that are attached to that EC2 instance will continue to persist. So do bear that in mind. So the next thing we want to do is just go ahead and delete these volumes. So I'm going to go in and go delete volumes and go ahead and hit yes, delete. And that has now deleted our volumes. I'm going to go through and delete my snapshots and my AMI because I don't want to be racking up charges willy-nilly. So I'm just going to go in and delete that. Sometimes if you do delete a snapshot too quickly after terminating an EC2 instance, you will get this error. So you can just come back and do that in a little bit. And then in terms of my AMI, I'm just going to go in here and go ahead and deregister this AMI. So we've now cleaned it all up. So just remember that volumes exist on EBS, and just think of EBS as a virtual hard disk drive in the cloud. Remember that snapshots exist on S3. So when we created that snapshot, that's going to take a photo, and that photo is stored on S3. And like I said, just think of snapshots as a photograph of the disk. Remember that snapshots are point-in-time copies of volumes. So when you take that snapshot, that's how that volume existed at that particular point in time. Snapshots are also incremental, so this means that only the blocks that have changed since your last snapshot are moved to S3. So if we took a snapshot and then created a new file and on that volume, and then we took another snapshot, only the blocks, only the delta, the changes between the blocks would be basically replicated to S3. So snapshots are incremental. And remember that if it's your first snapshot, it may take some time to create. Now, to create a snapshot for EBS volumes that serve as a root device volumes, you should really stop the instance before taking the snapshot, especially if it's a production workload. And that will just guarantee that your snapshots are going to be consistent. However, you can definitely still take a snapshot while the instance is running. Remember that you can create AMIs from both volumes and snapshots as well. So that's what we did. We created an AMI from our snapshot, but you can also create an AMI directly from the volume. You don't need to have to take a snapshot first. You can do it either way. And you can change EBS volume sizes on the fly, and that includes changing the size and the storage type. And volumes will always be in the same availability zone as the EC2 instance. So you'll never have a volume in one availability zone and your EC2 instance in another. Then in terms of migration, just remember that we can migrate EC2 volumes from one availability zone to another. To do that, we simply need to take a snapshot of it, then create an AMI from the snapshot, and then use that AMI to launch the EC2 instance in the new availability zone. Likewise, we can move EC2 instances from one region to another by taking a snapshot of it, creating an AMI of the snapshot, and then copying the AMI from one region to another. And we then use the copied AMI to launch the new EC2 instance in the new region. So that is it for this lecture, guys. In the next lecture, we're going to just quickly compare the different types of EBS volume types. So we've got EBS and then we've got instance store. So we will cover that off, and then we're going to look at encryption and how we can use encryption with EBS volumes. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.